There was once a man with deep interest in the extraordinary and plain things of life, who had a son who seemed to share his interest. So when the lad was old enough to give an informed response, his father asked if he would like to be told of all that the old man had learned thus far, or be killed now while there was still time. If everybody starts out wanting to be better, to be more conscious, then most eventually give up, then what the hell gives with mystics? Huh? Tell us that. If you dare. Can. The origin for man's concept of strained relations came from that naturally existing between his instincts and his thinking. Once upon a time, on a faraway world, was a creature who discovered a secret so unexpected that when he tried to tell others about it, they thought it too strange to be true and thus ignored it. So he employed a different approach and made it sound not so strange. But others then just found it boring. So he tried a third tactic of making it sound much weirder than it actually was. And then, finally, many of his fellow creatures took a liking to what they heard, and he became a popular celebrity. I guess the moral of this could be a small price to pay. Right? Once upon a time, there was a man who said, "That's exactly why I quit talking to myself." And now for tonight's cartoon feature. There was once a man who pretended to be a mystic, and a group of people who pretended to take him as such. And in his presentation of the comments he would present to them when they would meet, he would sometimes not prepare what he was going to say, and at other times not prepare even more. Anyone who understands this can surpass, anyone whose understanding can surpass this point does not need the word pretend redefined for them yet again. A gent once wrote to the fierce and piercing physician and asked, "Level with me, doc, is there actually any such creature as a mystic outside of one's own self? Potentially, that is." And the doctor replied, "I'm glad you threw in that last part." Without a dual nature, no creature would ever refer to itself. And someone in our viewing audience writes, "You recently read a story about one knight whose personal motto became, 'Fuck thought.' But my question is, after that what?" Dear sir, without a dual nature, no one would ask such a question. One man's head was transparent so that you could see his brain at work. I'll leave it to you to conclude as to what benefit, if any, this was. There was once a mystery school that looked upon the awakening as being based on the fact that everyone is born with the seeds within them of a whole other person, and that the awakening process is like that of a new generation following an older established one, but accomplished in the span of one individual's lifetime. Though men commonly speak of the stresses they suffer, they make no operational distinction between instinctive stress and mental stress, and fail to note how the former is open to uncomplicated alleviation while the latter seems resistant to any conclusive relief. Once any mystical school has enlightened its students as to the school's actual purpose, they burn it down. Tomorrow's lesson concerns how only the simple hear a telling of events historical to be only about historical events and events that took place outside of some man. In other words, try burning down your own mind. Things were once arranged in another kingdom so that only when a mythical knight was expelled from his secret order, only then was he identified as being a knight. What better way to confound the ordinary mind than by apparently giving it new information? Upon hearing of the just read, a lad turned to his father and said, "Do you realize what this then means regarding the extraordinary knowledge needed by those of the mystical hunger?" And his father replied, "Well, no." Anything even close to real thinking at the collective edge is always, at least in part, metaphorical. Strange tales can frighten the simple, but the unvarnished truth even more so. There was once a man who had 2 sets of children, and the first bunch liked to cling to his legs to play, while the other batch liked to climb up into his hair and frolic. Yes, there surely was once such a man who had such a brood. Okay, try it this way. Just what is a more awakened man other than one who can tell himself to get along now, go on outside and play? Superior understanding is never impressive for the simple reason that it is never realized. Not to try and diminish your fun, but do you begin to sense a wider and wider and more obviouser possibility to the basis of the secret? In lands where amateur knightly orders were permitted, they always used one of 2 mottos available to them. Either, I'm quoting, "Everyone taller than me is dumber than me," or "Everyone shorter than me is." For it to make sense of anything, the ordinary mind must call upon evidence from others. And yet another viewer writes, "As regards your mention several times now of how you can determine that a mystic is losing his edge by the fact of him beginning to find the sound of the truth redundant, may I ask you if redundancy is not the natural sound of the truth?" And I must admit that this correspondent has about put a wrap on it. Now time for another fine tale. There was once a traveler on his way to an extraordinarily exotic location, and partway through the journey was suddenly given the choice of either continuing the quite lengthy trip or being able to come to the conclusion that the destination did not actually exist. Would you read that to me again? No. Only the simple believe that the Grail is real and the secret a thing to actually be known. In his continuing attempt to tame the mind, one man has adopted an approach of refraining from saying what he thinks for fear it will prove autobiographical. Adds he, "Try it. The least you can say about it is that it doesn't not work." Those of a dual nature who realize it not are unable to conceal the fact. According to intergalactic legend, there was once a race on one planet who had the heartiest of laughs over the fact of creatures on another conceiving of things always being divided into sets of 2. Danger, danger, Bill Hatchback. It is not nice to make fun of the natural run of things, is it? One guy never grew a beard because he said he's afraid if he did, he'd never shave it off. Hey, are we talking about growing beards here or taking up thinking? When children hear of there being a secret, they all say that they want to know what it is. But is that really so? Is not part of childish pleasures in the torment of not knowing? One crosswalk guard offered this caution: "God, but it's tricky for a mystic to grow up without actually becoming mature." Query, how do you spell the end of transcendency in 8 letters? Finality. A neophyte in a monastery one day approached the headmaster and asked him, "Revered sir, how can a student such as myself know when he is getting close to awakening?" And the wise one replied, "Are you coming down with the flu or something?" Another example of how the mind continually strives to make facts fit, or at least nearly fit, its standard expectations. An example, a headline that says, "Jumbo jet crashes in Brazil, injures almost 3 people." The physiology of possibility. You can walk along without thinking, or think along without walking. Sort of. Though not part of the general mystical literature, there was once a school that said there were two distinct ways to produce a more conscious man. One way was to instruct him in methods to become more conscious. Another way was to beat his present consciousness out of him. Ho-hum, and as always, if you do not comprehend that this little yarn is about one man and what occurred within his own head, then you miss its real point. In fact, it seems time for a new definition. A real, and I mean real mystic, is one to whom even the obvious has become too apparent to be any longer of much interest. There was one knightly order who would accept no new applicant who had not swallowed whole some other entire person, preferably himself. During a writers' conference, someone in the audience asked one author if the highly erotic passages in his latest work were in fact autobiographical. And he responded with a general literary explanation by saying, a man does not have to be a murderer to write murder mysteries. And someone in the crowd hearing this said to himself, that may be, but God, it's horrible to think about that in regard to those writing about the Enlightenment. Out of desperation, men write fiction. Out of super desperation, they live it. As he, in a dream, entered into the second secret inner ring of the mystical monastery, he was greeted with a notice that announced, a slight weight gain herein is normal and to be expected. To help combat the unruly rats apparently addicted to his residence, one man had imported a particularly nasty strain of fleas which he forthwith set upon the rodents. In worlds of even-numbered dimensions, think not so much in terms of combat, but rather of retaliation. And one man glanced at his own thinking and said, now you tell me. A story from outer space. There was once some creatures who went from one planet to another and lived on the new one quite well, at least as well as did its native born. But the day came when they got sick of being there. End of story. The urge to solve your problems is not the mystical urge. First voice asked, what's the difference between someone who knows the secret and someone who simply doesn't care? And the second voice said, why ask me? To which the first voice replied, who do I have but you and me? And the second voice thinks on this for a moment or two, then started to say, so who cares, but caught himself in the nick of time, lest he meaningless nick the pseudo-delicate nexus that made the two voices one. One man would sometimes leave his house with the intention of taking a certain type of lengthy walk, which he attempted by never planning in which direction to head. Such curious efforts have the capacity to produce a new internal connection between man's dual nature that is not full in a fair reading of that word. After all, who knows what a man who knows the secret really knows, since he never tells? The itch to be mystically admired is not the true mystical itch. If you recall, we recently reported on a story when a certain man thought that he had a tumor, but it turned out to just be his head. Well, there's a new twist on it. It's now being told of a certain tumor who thought that he had a man, but... The yin to make up for your perceived weaknesses is not the mystical yin. There's a sure way to identify the simple. They're the ones who'll accept simple encouragement and reassurances, then go on about their business as though they never heard it. Buy the old compounded buy. Lest anyone believe that individual people are being picked on through these comments regarding the simple, remember this. When the river rises inside a closed system, everyone's furniture gets wet. And no one's wetter than anyone else's. Of course, buy the old even more complex buy. This is precisely why those who understand anything about the typographical layout of local reality refuse to live where everyone else lives. The craving to do magical tricks is not the mystical craving. It's anatomy. Nothing even resembling real thinking stands on but two legs. The desire to be understood is not the mystical quest. One man's approach to health finally came down to this, said he. If I get sick, kill me. And we're not speaking physical here, you know. The hunger to be the center of attention, even among a small group of people, is not the mystical hunger. Regarding responsibility for the many thoughts that passed through him, one man began to refer to his mind as the alleged perpetrator. Wanting to save the world is not a wanting for awakening, nor is the desire to help others find their way a part of the true mystical quest. UFOs and the ageless age of chivalry. One king said to his personal private army, "Look not to the heavens nor the dark distant woods. The aliens are already here among us. They are indeed within us." And I suspect by now that you probably know what he was referring to. More insiders, info, and gossip. The common generic name behind all the numerous public ones applied to the many apparent mystical orders has always been, "Shut up, damn it." Simplicity makes perfect, and even greater simplicity, greater perfection, until all is silent and glaringly obvious. From one view, those not satisfied at all with their normal state of awareness and who incessantly strive to escape it are surely outsiders. And yet, from another angle, it is the ordinary who are the real outsiders and the mystics who are in fact closest to everyday life. Life speaks one language to instinct and another to the mind, but the alert hear it all just the same. Time now for some grammatical news. Amongst one group of more enlightened creatures, they vanquished all synonyms for the word synonym. You see, the awakened's idea of efficiency is like, boom, slap, bam, out of here. To help protect himself, when he heard of the possibility of those studying themselves, studying the wrong self, this one man instead undertook a thorough investigation of a small turtle he carried with him. And now lastly, we wrap up with some music news. The latest band to crack the top 10 sound barrier is a group going by the name of Never Embarrass a Mystic. In the consideration that we were considering, about there being an undeniable dual nature to man, and of my several versions of the drawing, and consider, let me him to do it again, at the level of consciousness, no matter what it's called, from here down there is a non-thinking part of man. It's all being overlapped and not as discrete as words would have it, but there is indeed enough apparent discreteness to it that is worthwhile to map out man in such areas, because all examples, all of the normal operations of man point to this. And as I myself, I believe, made clear to you, or you made clear to yourself, that people continually admit to the reality of it. That you can call it from the level of human consciousness down, you can call it man's biology, his instincts, you can call it man's physical existence. And from the level of consciousness up, obviously you refer to it vis-a-vis, or do-si-do for those of you in more rural areas. You're given to typography. You can call it man's psychology, man's mental self, and for those still holding on to the past, his spiritual self. And every time a man makes any reference to himself, under ordinary conditions, he is admitting to this dual nature. And a bit more specifically, anytime a man makes any explanation, anytime a man plays excuse-moi to any degree, whether it apparently is sophisticated, whether it apparently is backed up with literate evidence, references, or whether it's just a very crude defense of oneself, of a man being stuck for an answer and go, screw you. If it was either that or he called upon some literary allusion from the collected works of Goethe and tried to explain away his behavior then. There was a news item tonight, if you recall, about the writers' conference wherein someone asked a writer and he offered a literary explanation, which was a kind of defense. But anytime an individual, anytime you say, well, and it's followed with something resembling, when I say explanation and defense, it is not simply on the basis of you or I, but in this case me, attacking that. Because it passes for, it is accepted quite well socially. It is part of the normal human lubrication for intercourse, social intercourse. But every time a man is making any explanation, anytime you do something, say something, and if no other question be raised other than an eyebrow, a tacit raising, and someone go, and you go, okay, all right, I know what you're thinking, but let me say this. You are admitting, you are confessing to, you are depending upon the fact that your attacker, your accuser, is also victim of a dual nature, and you're also, all you're doing is reaffirming to him, all you're doing is calling upon a silently agreed upon, a previously agreed upon basis of this human intercourse, this tango, that we're both, at least partially, irresponsible. We can't help it. We're decent people. We're civilized. I can see, yes, hello. Yes, you went to Yale, grab me. But it is the unspoken, prearranged dance step wherein a man says, well, blah, 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 blah. Another person just goes, and I'm doing the sophisticated version instead of attempting to punch the guy in the nose. And your listener goes, and you go, okay, wait a minute, let me try it another way. All of that. You know what you call an ordinary person? I mean, especially a good verbose person whose arm's in a sling? You know what you refer to as speech impairment. Under ordinary conditions, almost, and I'll leave it to you to find any exceptions if you want to, but almost all references to oneself is a form of an admission to man's dual nature. But we'd already covered that, and I'm trying to bring you up to another point. And having to do with that, you have what amounts to, if your eyesight gets better, it's not just a circular running about between man's dual nature. It becomes a spiraling effect that normally takes longer than one person's generation. The time is getting, as we say in cosmology, the time now is beginning to get squinched up a little. But still, generally, it takes a generation. And if it does, or I could say one lifetime, but that does not preclude the fact that things can speed up. And if we say an average man lives now 70 years of age chronologically, time can still speed up to such a point that after, say, the age of 20, just for instance, that he is deaf, he is dead, and he does not sense the speeding up. Oh, okay, he senses it, but he says, my God, things are going downhill faster than I ever imagined. I mean, sure, we were wild and things were getting a little woolly when I was a teenager, but look at it now. Okay, that's the way you feel. But still, when I say the kind of spiraling, it's the same thing as the general progression of the collective parade of humanity. That in one person's lifetime, and that is his semi-comatose lifetime, that he will not sense time speeding up in any favorable sense. The only time that you feel, the only time that ordinary consciousness has any sensation of time moving at any discernible rate of speed, as I point out, is actually when you're young and into your teen years, and it's that excitement, the thing like, well, boy, just think what I'll be someday, where I'll go, what I'll do, and all that. Then you get to be 20, you get some woman pregnant, or you get some man pregnant, if you're a woman, I guess, and you get married, and you get a double wide, and you get a mortgage, and you're done for. And after that, there is no sensation of this spiraling, not like that. If there's any sensation of a spiraling, it's... But this plays itself out, and men never have any notice of it, which puts you at a severe disadvantage, as witnessed by one of the news items tonight that says that those of a dual nature who realize it not are driven to continually conceal the fact, or I could say attempt to conceal it. You spend a great deal of neural energy in the unknowing attempt, whilst continually admitting, confessing to your dual nature, simultaneously expending energy, going, no. It's like this whole thing. It's like trying to push and pull, and you go, no, let me explain what happened. And you're saying, no, you don't need an explanation. The spiral, let me show you how there is an unresolved, as it should be at the ordinary level, but it's unresolved and unnoticed, the tension between man's instinct, that is, everything below, using that kind of arbitrary, discrete mapping of man from the level of consciousness down and the level of consciousness up. There's an unrealized, unresolved, continual tension between the two. And if I may understate it, there is much that goes on at the ordinary level that men find totally inexplicable, that's really explicable. If it is looked at in light of the fact of this unresolved tension, this continuing natural tension between instinct and the intellect. To get outside a dual picture, how about this? I can make up a whole new something or other. The 3 stages of gracefulness. Now we are speaking about man instinctively, speaking about the instinctive, the physical, the natural, biological, the physiological, but it's the instinctive covers it, side of man, and then, after a few years, his potential, if you're ordinarily wired up to be neurally sound, you then develop another world in conjunction with it. It does not replace one, it does not replace the earlier one. It then operates in conjunction so that you are of this dual nature. And it is that which makes man superior to all other creatures, as far as you can tell, on this planet. As far as obvious. But to get past just the dual side, now consider the 3 stages of gracefulness. I was just considering right quick whether I could make any readily available sense out of this, and I thought, well, how ridiculous for me to worry about that at this late stage. I'm just betting I can with your help. All right, everyone understands what gracefulness is. And this could be men or women. My first, as I was jumping along a couple of milliseconds ahead of what I was saying, I started to pull out a male version, but I can do a female, I guess. You can look at children at an early age if you have anything resembling sang-froid eyesight. If you had anything resembling the ability just to look upon life at all. So I got to give you some credit for any of these examples. Don't worry about flying to even taxi. So we'll assume that you have some ability. Do you know by now that you can look upon a kid by the time he begins to walk? And you can see some kids that are naturally graceful and some who are naturally clumsy. Now, anything after that, comma, and then you start saying, well, let me tell you about Billy. You understand what you're back to doing? Well, you're showing for one thing that you're no longer speech impaired if you're doing that. But you're back to making a confession via explanation to man's dual nature. But I'm just assuming that you understand this. That there are children, it's just as easy as hell to see. In fact, for those of you who are now in graduate school here, you might care to note, I'll go ahead and put in words for you, the rest of you can take a quick doze. If you know how to do it, you can almost look at kids fresh out of the womb. If you know how to do it, and you can look and tell if they're clumsy or not, or graceful. But we that is at bay. There are children graceful, and if that seems to be pushing it for you, you know at least this. By the time you get into elementary school, and the kids are turned outside for playtime, you have got to be of greater confined eyesight and understanding than even the normal run-of-the-mill dunderhead, not to realize that by the kindergarten, first grade, get outside and it's physical, it's playtime. The teacher says, all right, lay down the books, all that, and everybody go out and let's play Ring Around the Roses or Chase or whatever you play. And there's some kids that after the first day you realize, or the first 5 minutes, the teacher knows it, the kids know it, that there's some kids you cannot throw them the ball, they'll never catch it. You do not want them to head up your team of any kind. You know that it's dangerous to play let's all run up the side of a mountain or let's all climb a tree, because you know that Billy and Sally, but it's going to be more Billy's than Sally's. But you know that, wait a minute, Billy, why don't you be in charge of the whistle? Why don't you blow the whistle? Because you know that there's every likelihood that he is going to trip. And of course, again, for those of you in graduate school here, I don't have to keep pointing out there to people out there, because some of you were clumsy as little 7-legged octopi when you were kids. And I hope you take this personally. It is better if I wanted to do it in the first person to you, or the second person, and say, well, there's some of you that you realize you grew up being clumsy. You felt awkward. In slang vernacular, it used to be spastic. That you were just clumsy. Now there are girls that way. It just seems to be more men than boys and girls. But there are girls who are clumsy. So here it goes. Now listen, I'm going to make it, as always, as short as possible, at least shorter than real life. Let's have Billy X. He is clumsy. Now I mean clumsy in the full sense of the word. It's not just the clumsiness as observable from external view. Not just clumsy as judged by his peers, by others. He would have to be just a wee bit out of the norm to become, or to stay aware of his lack of grace past the point of maturity. All right, some of this, if you were just tuning in out there, you might think that this almost sounds like some sort of psychological profiling of man, and it's not. But I know that's how it may sound at first, but remember the basis of how this started from the instinctive and the mental dual natures of man. Let's take Billy X, and he is not graceful, but still assume that he is not suffering from some miswiring neurally. He's not actually off balance because of his sense of equilibrium is dictated by the brain, is controlled by the brain. It is simply, and I'm not going to it anymore, he is simply in the same way that some kids are born to be fat. Some kids, you're either born to be tall, short, etc. It's not that far removed that he has never been graceful. He may have never used those words, but he knew that he was not good at sports. He finally had to face up to it. And the norm, when I said that my little example of Billy X would be somewhat, a little bit outside the standard mold, because an ordinary, non-graceful Billy X, sometime, most likely before puberty, or at least by puberty, would then be involved with just an absolute denial, an ignoring of the fact. He would turn his attention elsewhere, and once it just became clear to him that he had to accept the fact that no one would let him play on their team, that even his father would give up trying to buy him a ball glove every birthday, trying to change positions, buy him a catcher's mitt and then a first baseman's mitt, and then go, oh, all right, damn, I'll buy you a soccer ball. And finally his father gives up because the bills are getting too high, paying to have his bones set. And so the typical Billy X would then finally someday, in an enlightened stroke of insight, decide, I'll join the chess team. And that's sort of the end of it, if you understand what that represents. That he turns his back. He accepts in a non-graceful manner his ungracefulness down here, his lack of grace. In other words, a standard person, they would end up being an adult, and if you just met them at a party or somewhere and you tried to bring up the local sports scene, he would very likely be the kind of guy that'd straighten the pencils in his pocket and adjust his glasses and says, well, I don't have time for that kind of stuff. In other words, he would poo-poo even keeping up vicariously with sports because his attention apparently had been turned somewhere else. But now let's follow. This is not a singular instance because this does happen. It is non-standard though. And we could be talking about Jane X, who was just never graceful. Just always seemed awkward, never considered herself to be all that pretty. And it's not just facial features, it was just, she always seemed to be kind of at 6s and 7s. She always seemed to be almost about to come apart. You know, she couldn't dance, and you know, she'd try to, either one of these, but let's take Billy X. Let's say he gets somewhere close to maturity. And he has not completely turned his attention away from the fact of him being ungraceful. He has not learned to live with it. Those of you really getting good can take the idea of being graceful as a metaphor for something or other. He has not given up his awareness of being naturally, instinctively lacking grace. And as non-standard as it may be, and Jane X could have been the same way, but let's say Billy X, and he's past the point. He is very near maturity. That is, he is very near the peak of his hormonal drive, wherein he should have been settled down and began to put on weight, get a beer gut. He should have given up more or less on life. That should have been his lifetime. But let's say that for some strange reason he decides something can be done about this. It finally gets the best of him. One of the probably more common ways, still I admit as uncommon as this is, in case any of you think that it's an extremely obscure example, it just may be to you, but one of the probably paramount examples of this happening nowadays would be some Billy X that gets to be somewhere in the neighborhood of mature. And rather than give it up, rather than the fact that he has from the age of, let's say, I'm just giving you a rough figure, some 10 or 11, when it just became obvious nobody was going to call him to play on their team, that he was like the booby prize, and he just quit even trying. Socially, he quit even trying out in collective situations. It's like he just accepted the fact that I am not as graceful, I'm not as athletic as everyone else, and I don't really see what to do about it. And it's like they gave up on me, and he did not give completely up, but it's though he's almost as though he's put the whole problem in abeyance. And he goes along a few more years, and let's say just generally he's getting up to 19, 20. And for some reason he decides, screw this. And probably, I was going to say, I guess the most common example nowadays would probably be he would take up one of the martial arts. In times past, it might have been that he would have taken up weightlifting. It's all getting to be the same thing. But the martial arts, well, let's cover it all. Let's say a combination that he found some martial arts school that had a gym there, and they encouraged him to do it. And he gets through the first stumbling part. It would take him a while, because you would have a class of those involved with taking some martial arts in the United States, that version of the Western world of martial arts, or if he went into a good gym. Not one of those sissy gyms with carpets, but I'm talking about, you know, Bubba's black and blue gym upstairs where there's only 2 rules: no checks and don't piss in the sink. If he went to a place like that, he is already confronted. I mean, it's going to take something for him to get through the initial shock of being there, because he is going to be surrounded by people who were, compared to him, naturally graceful. He would look at it, he would sense it as being an absolute enemy territory, because this is no longer 8- and 9-year-old boys haranguing him because he can't throw a ball good or because he can't catch one good. He's now walked into an environment that there are guys twice his size with IQs not much greater than probably his shoe size, but they're twice, and he's there by himself. No teacher made him go there. He's paying for the privilege to go there and be completely out of his element. But let's say that he perseveres, either in the gym or in the martial arts, or I was going to say the girl, I guess she could end up taking ballet. And that she would walk into the class. A proprietary school, people paying money to go there, and she walks in there, and everyone there probably has already had some background in dance. Remember, I've pictured this Jane X, my fictional character, that could not even dance. Period. I mean, she wouldn't go to the proms and etc., just dateless. Not just because of looks, but because of lack of grace. There seemed to be no natural grace to her physical movements, to her physical existence. So she could walk into an environment that she's immediately confronted with enemy territory. And if she was at the age of 18 or 20, something like that, and she's going out, remember now, she is paying for the privilege to go out there and run the immediate possibility of being insulted, being absolutely out of her element, and know it in advance. And she perseveres. She gets through the immediate shock of it. Or Billy actually gets through hanging around this gym with, as far as he's concerned, the people almost from another planet. If he perseveres long enough, and she does, they can end up with a sense of grace. Now, ordinary people would not call it that. If we had an ordinary Billy X, and let's say that you knew him in high school, and you remember what a klutz he was. And he's just a klutz. You know what that means. And he was just good old Billy. He was in, helped run the projector and the microphones, and he was in a chess club. But, everybody remembers. Geek, I guess you'd call him now. Everybody remembers it. So let's say that here it is. You haven't seen him in like 4 or 5 years since high school, and you're across him on the street, or somewhere, and somebody has to point out you don't even recognize him. The guy now, and it's not just size, but if he had been, let's say, working out, that he no longer weighs 150 pounds, maybe he weighs 190 pounds, and is muscle. I mean, he doesn't look like himself. He now looks like guys on the football team used to look when he was in high school, when you and him was in high school. Now remember, it's not just the size, though. He now has a certain kind of grace. And if it was ordinary people, I know what they would normally say if somebody was falling. They'd say, yeah, that kind of thing happens. And they would describe it as saying, well, what happened to him? And they would, I'm sure, want to use terms like, well, he has now built up a new kind of self-confidence by being able to go to the gym, and him being a little 98-pound winkle, as it used to say on the back of Superman comic books, that he went now and he has built himself up. He is now a fine specimen of a man, a lot better looking. Bigger muscles, better development. I mean, he is now beyond, he is above average in physique. And along with that, it took him several years of hard work, discipline, really staying at it. And so that very thing will help build up a new kind of self-confidence. There's no doubt Billy X has a new image of himself. Be that as it may. You know what he really has? You know what he feels? You know what Jane feels? That she's gotten to the point now that they let her actually dance when the school puts on things. And it's not just somebody else's proof. No, maybe I shouldn't throw that in. It's now to the point that she looks forward to going. She simply has developed, and it's not a continuing 24-hour-a-day process, but she now experiences moments of gracefulness. And it's very likely while she's in class, it may be very likely that, and not every day in fact, but when she will leave class, it goes on for some period of time. There's a remedial effect, say for a couple of hours. Or my Billy X. It's not all the time, but after several years, and he's getting to the point now that he walks in the gym, and now he walks in, and the guys, him and these other guys that at one time were creatures from another planet, literally. And he now can walk in, and he walks in, and he'll spit in the floor. You know, screw what the sign says. That's right, piss in the sink. And he walks in, and the rest of the guys going, hey, all right. He goes, hey, hey. You know, he can do it. And when he first walked in that place, the first time he walked upstairs and, got through the dust, and he looked around, and everybody looked at him like, God damn, are you in the wrong place? And that's the way he felt. Like I said, another planet. And now, here it is several years later, and he can walk in, and not just walk in, but he can walk in that walk. He feels graceful, but it's not necessarily, or it's not, a 24-hour-a-day thing. But it reaches a point, if he perseveres, my imaginary figure, that he gets to the point that he now feels as home there, as much at home as he does anywhere. And him and these other guys that at one time he would have been frightened of, or that he would have felt nothing in common with, he now feels just as much at ease there, which is a form of gracefulness. He now feels as much at ease sometimes as he does anywhere. And it too, in the male example, can have a residual effect that can last for hours, that he can get through and shower and walk out of there and walk down the street, and it's not just, even though their description will be, well, he's got a new self-image and he feels better about himself. I know the term now. It's more than that. It's not that that's untrue, but that is just the superficial. That's a non-understanding of what's happened. What he is doing now is he walks out of that gym on some days. He showers, and he walks out, and just walking. He just walks down the stairs and walks down the street, and he feels he is graceful. Now, if it's not natural, let me also point this out, and there's a reason I point this out. He can be, and I'm assuming that men and women, that you got some sensation. Here it is, a man who 3 years ago was a poster boy for geekdom. Awkward, ill at ease, did not like his body, to say the least, and that could have been the girl too, but here it is, several years later, and Billy has put on 50 pounds, or whatever I said, of good solid muscle. And it's not any of these things I mentioned. It's not just because he's got muscle now, and it's not just because he can get along with people who used to frighten him, that is big, chunky-looking, muscular guys with no brains, as far as he was concerned. It's not just any of those two things, and it's not just that he now thinks he looks better. All three of those may be true. But that's not what is happening. That is not what the real pleasure is. It is now that he walks out of there, let's say, on a given day. Good hard workout, good shower, the humidity just right, the sun's out, and he walks down the stairs. And it's like a whole different world to him, or to the girl, that he can walk, and it's almost like, when I say that he's graceful, it's like up until then, his life up before that, he didn't even feel as though he could walk. He felt embarrassed walking. It was the other kids would go, shh. Not only could he not run and catch a ball, he just felt, the teacher would ask him to go up to the front of the class or something, and he wanted to disappear. It's like he couldn't even walk, and now he walks down the steps, and he might as well, in one sense, he might as well now be a high jumper. He might himself be a ballerina. It is so much fun that he is graceful. But also, if it is not instinctive, if it was not natural, and he has done it, he comes through after a hard workout one day, good shower, sun, warmth, walks down the street, and he passes a couple of guys standing in the corner, and just as he gets past, they're talking about something, he hears, and suddenly he trips and it's gone. He don't even know what he's laughing at, but it could have been him. He lost it. He worked 3 years, and he was like, I could not feel better. I could not be more graceful. And he's walking right out of the gym, and walking along. And he hears, ha! And he trips, and it's gone. There are 3 stages of gracefulness. May I remind you again that we're not talking, the point is not about physical strength or looks or dexterity or even just physical grace. But remember, it is a beautiful and it is a perfect and it is a workable example. There are whole lots of people who start out instinctively graceful. They're just normal people. And within that, I know there's a range of people that are more graceful and less graceful. But if you never think that you're not graceful, you're graceful. If you play ball as well as anyone else, if you dance as well as anyone else, if you're a girl and other girls treat you like one of the girls, then you're as graceful as norm. If you do not feel as though you are, then you're not. And as non-routine as it may be, a person can, through their apparent own efforts, such as my Billy X in the gym or my Jane X in the ballet class, develop grace, a sense of grace, and be graceful under certain conditions, certain times, wherein they were not naturally. They have accomplished a truly unnatural act, much more so than the ordinary realm that people consider to be of self-improvement. That to do this, you are closer to something of an extraordinary nature than you are by simply making D's throughout high school, in some way wrangle a scholarship to college and into your junior year suddenly blossom and win an all-paid physics scholarship to Princeton. It is not that kind of apparent self-improvement. When you're down to the point that it is in the instinctive display of man, into the movements of man, you're closer to a miraculous, and just closer to something miraculous than someone who made poor grades in high school and you see them years later and they're a brain sturgeon. And you go, how can that be? He was stupid. That is not as impressive as seeing my Billy X, who was a geek on wheels, and you see him 4 years later, and he's walking gracefully, a swagger. He's just not himself. That is closer to a miracle than doing something apparently at the ordinary level above the line of consciousness. But the 3 stages of gracefulness. You can be naturally graceful, instinctively so, is what it amounts to. Or you can be instinctively not graceful, and through your own efforts, develop it somewhat. And the 3rd stage is you can lose it. You can lose it as easily, if you reach the 2nd stage, as you gained it. In fact, more so. I'm assuming that some of you caught the point that Billy spends 3 years in the gym and can walk out on good days, and it's a whole new world, that he is graceful. He feels at ease with himself. He feels physically at ease. But what it is, he is experiencing being graceful. But it took him 3 years, 5 years to get to this point sometimes. But on that very day I made up one of the days when it's like his body is working like clockwork. But all he does is this beautiful, tall, blonde-headed women has always done something to him. Or guys, especially guys that look kind of rough around the edges, standing around talking. Make up your own choice. He walks past a couple of guys. They don't necessarily look his way, but as soon as he gets by, he hears, or, if that doesn't work, he gets right to the corner and suddenly this tall blonde, the kind he just dreams about, the kind that he is far too clumsy to ever approach, and she walks by, and suddenly that which he worked for is gone faster than it took him to gain it. That is the spiral. In the last several weeks, to stretch your own recollection, I brought in a handful or more of stories I concocted about life doing a certain thing, about a child starting out doing a certain thing in life, about a knight who decided that what would help him along the way was to always think the word potato All right, I think the final version, I didn't even tell you the word. It was just that he picked out one word that no matter what else was taking place in his life and in his mind, he strove to keep that one word always somewhere kind of in the back of his mind. But then as his travels progressed and he became more graceful at the journey, he came to the conclusion, became the decision of trying not, no matter what happened, not to ever think of that word. But then, if you go to the third stage, past either doing it, trying to do it, or trying not to do it, the third stage is. There are three stages to everything that is apparent. Anything that is apparently subject to change in a reality of even numbered dimensions. That is, what you turn around with your ordinary mind and see as being life, if it is capable of change, it is capable of three stages. But no one takes that into consideration. Because if you do not see that all change is based upon the fact that you're a jewel in nature to start with, and no reason you want to change is you don't like one of them, you can say, well, I don't like the way I look. You can say that. You can say, I don't like the way I talk. You can say that. You can say, I don't like... you can say you don't like anything. But after that, it's just fill in the blank. Because all you're doing is admitting to your dual nature. And an ordinary person, if they try to change it at all, what they think is, I have got to overcome this part. I was ungainly. I'll work hard and become gainly. And? Well, what do you mean, and? If I get to be graceful, I used to be clumsy. But if I get to be unclumsy, what do you mean, and? I said, well, after that, what? Right, after that, paradise, heaven, girl city. Punch everybody around time. Don't take any shit time. You go, no, what's after that? And to an ordinary mind, there is no after that. Success is success. What they're looking at is some finality. I was ungraceful, I became graceful. What do you want from me? What do you mean, what after that? There's always an after that. There was a lot more to the three stages I made up than I got to, but you knew that, didn't you? There is that which is natural to anybody. And we're not saying good or bad. It's not a judgment call, or not from any other person. You start out one way. You're naturally overweight. You're naturally clumsy. You're naturally shy. You're naturally, instinctively. All that's instinct. That's not something you learn. Again, if you ever develop a mystical clinical eyesight, you can walk in and watch a kid be born. Sometimes before they even slap him on the ass, and you go, you know he's going to be shy. Tell no one's going to be pushy. Look at one and go, I'd never buy insurance from or a used car from that guy. You saved yourself some time in case you run across him 25 years later on a car lot, and you go, I remember you. Whatever it is that you are instinctively as or are not, it can be strove against or striven against. And so you can look at it, and that's as far as an ordinary person ever thinks about any sort of change. That yes, I'd like to change, I'd like to be better, they're driven to be. But they see it only in the terms of overcoming something that they are already instinctively slanted to be, or already instinctively are. And so they see any change. And they will start off and describe it in other areas. They'll describe it in personality in terms that sound psychological, but it all gets down to being ungraceful. That's where it comes from, in the full sense of the word. And to them, any progress is overcoming that. You go, okay, you can. I just made up the examples. They're true. It happens. But then you say, to my alleged interested listener, I say, after that what? After you have admitted through your own efforts the dual nature, and now you feel as though you have, they won't say overcome it. Like people say, well, I've overcome my shyness. They know it's not really true. It's like an alcoholic saying in the professional alcoholic ranks that, no, I hadn't quit drinking, I'm just temporarily between drinks, or I'm not cured, I've just postponed it. Then if they were good, an ordinary person could say, well, I can't say I'm completely over being shy, but I'm mostly not shy. So in that sense, they feel, I've succeeded. I can do things now I could never do. When you go, well, bravo for you. You go, what do you mean, now what? Now what? Is that all? All right. Move them out. since I found out no one enjoyed that one the other night.